Very good.
Yeah.
So, look, can I ask you? Well,
Of course you can, yeah.
okay. Let me ask you a question. On you were talking on Glenn Beck about the UN.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about what this treaty in Copenhagen is going to do for the UN and to the economy of the United States?
It will make the UN very rich. It will also make the particular part of the UN that's going to get very rich more powerful than any other government has ever been on Earth, because the Copenhagen Treaty says in the draft which I've read that there is to be a world government, and the word government appears in the treaty in this context for the first time in any international treaty. That government is going to be given powers to intervene directly in the economies of countries such as the United States and in their environmental affairs. It's going to be allowed to put a tax of 2% on every financial transaction across the whole United States. It's also going to be allowed to confiscate every year the equivalent of half of the entire US defense budget and transfer that first of all to its own pockets, then to the Swiss bank accounts of various third world dictators, and then, if there's any left, which there probably won't be, to build up sea walls against sea level that we now know is not going to rise in third world countries such as the Maldives. Well, all of this is now proven unnecessary because the UN's climate panel is now out of date. The latest science that's just come in shows the effect of CO2 on temperature to be small, harmless and generally beneficial. And in fact it's only 1/6 of the warming effect, perhaps even 1/7 of what the UN had predicted. So the truth is in, the science is out there, the models were off, and the scare is over.
Well, on in Al Gore's movie, he talks about how it's basically too late, that the ionosphere has been, the thin layer of the atmosphere has already been compromised, and that there's too much CO2 in the air already to stop global warming from happening.
He's simply wrong. And why do we know that he's wrong? We know that he's wrong because we have now, for the first time, after 20 years of very careful measurement, been able to measure the relationship between changes in temperature at the surface and changes in outgoing radiation at the top of the atmosphere. That's what the whole debate scientifically is all about. Is this radiation from the Earth's surface being trapped in the atmosphere by the extra greenhouse gases where it can cause warming? Or is it getting back out into space, much as it always did? We now have the definitive measured answer. No longer are we guessing with huge Xbox 360s or PlayStations. We have the definitive answer by measurement using the Earth Radiation Budget satellite, 20 years of observations, meticulous analysis by Professor Richard Lindzen, who is the Alfred P. Sloan Professor of Planetary and Atmospheric Sciences at MIT. He's the world's greatest expert on the atmosphere and what's going on up there.
Right.
And he says that radiation is getting out to space pretty much as it always did. It's not staying down here, and because it's not staying down here, it can't be causing global warming. And that's why, in fact, there hasn't been any global warming for the last 15 years.
Right. Well, people like Gore and other critics who, think global warming's happening, keep telling us about the ice caps melting and the glaciers melting and all those effects they claim are caused by global warming.
All right. Well, first of all, even if those things were happening, which they're largely not, then the fact of warming does not necessarily tell us what is causing the warming. After all, the question, if you see warming going on, is when did it begin? Well, when did it begin, I should say? It began 300 years ago in 1695. It continued until 1995 for 300 years. During 280 of those 300 years, even the UN admits we couldn't possibly have had anything much to do with it. And so then there's just been a last little bit of warming over the last 20 years, during which, in theory, we might have had some influence, if you believe the UN's exaggerated idea of the effect of CO2 on temperature. But that rate of warming that we've seen in the last 20 years is more or less identical to the rate of warming that we saw between 1860 and 1880, and again between 1910 and 1940. So there has been no extra warming rate in those 20 years when there was warming just recently, but that stopped in 1995, and since then there has been no statistically significant warming at all. So are the ice caps melting? No. In fact, there's 24% more ice in the Arctic at its summer minimum this year in mid-September than there was 2 years ago. Because 2 years ago there was a big decline in the Arctic ice, but 3 weeks later than that big decline, there was a 30-year record high extent for Antarctic ice, the other end of the globe. So whatever was causing the loss of Arctic ice, it can't have been global warming, can it? And in fact, there's been no change in the overall extent of sea ice, if you take it globally, throughout the 30 years during which we've been able to measure it by satellites. Before that, we couldn't measure it at all.
So about the U.S. Constitution,
yes,
and how this Copenhagen Accord, I guess it's a treaty,
yes,
is going to affect the U.S. Constitution.
That's right. The law is this, that under the Vienna Convention on International Treaties, the terms of an international treaty do not stand alongside your constitution, as Article 6 of your constitution says. They take precedence over it. And because the Vienna Convention is itself an international treaty that has been ratified by the United States, then that stands alongside your constitution and says any international treaty supersedes your constitution.
Right.
Therefore, if you have a major international treaty that says there's going to be a world government, of course the word election, the word ballot, the word democracy, the word vote, none of these words appear in the 200 pages of this treaty draft. But if that unelected, essentially communistic world government takes over, and that is what will happen if that treaty is signed at Copenhagen, then even if your president or your negotiators merely sign it, your State Department will immediately go around saying that that is now the law of the land and it has to be complied with, as they have done with the Law of the Sea Treaty. And that's even if he doesn't get it ratified, because the Law of the Sea Treaty hasn't been ratified. Bill Clinton signed it. The Senate did not, by 2/3 majority, ratify it. He never even sent it to them because he knew they wouldn't. But the State Department says, well, because we've signed it, it's the law of the land anyway. So the danger, if you sign this treaty, even if you just sign it, is very considerable, because you're signing away not only prodigious amounts of your taxpayers' dollars, right, but you're also signing away your very freedom and democracy to an overarching world government that has the power not just to intervene in your economy, but to control, and even if it wants, shut down all world financial and other trading markets. That is also in the treaty.
How about who really tends to gain from this? Is Al Gore involved in some sort of plan to, get some of the money of this?
Of course, because he has a corporation called Generation Investment Management, where he invites people with more money than sense to invest. For instance, the Church of England's church commissioners have just put $200 million into his investment management corporation. If this treaty doesn't go through, they're going to lose pretty much every penny. And he, of course, makes a fortune because he gets a percentage of every investment in that corporation. So he is making hundreds of millions of dollars out of this. And of course, the last thing he wants is somebody like me coming along and saying, just a moment here. We now know from the science that none of this adds up anymore. It never really did, but now we have the proof. And so he finds that a very inconvenient truth.
What about George Soros? Is he involved in this in any way?
Yes, he has also been putting up money to support the notion that global warming is a real problem. He is making money out of it by trying to control and gain expertise in the trading of carbon dioxide rights of emission. In other words, in future, if this treaty goes
so
through,
that's cap and trade.
There will be cap and trade worldwide. Of course, you're going to have it in the Waxman-Markey or Boxer Kerry bills in this country anyway, unless the Senate has the Senate.
Unless we can vote Boxer out before that.
Well, that would be a very good start. Yes, I mean, not that I should intervene in any way in your politics, but from the point of view of stopping cap and trade, that would be a good start, obviously. But if the Senate refuses cap and trade, if it refuses to ratify that Copenhagen Treaty, then you do have the chance of resisting and saying, no, we're not going to have those treaty provisions here. And you would then be able to go to court and say, no, this isn't the law of the land because it hasn't been ratified. The day that the trend in international law is towards more and more international agreements, and therefore, even though we haven't ratified it, it should still stand as the law of the land.